I am Shayna Weber. I'm the Manager of Production and Research at ISA. And before I throw to these lovely women who are going to introduce themselves today, I would just like to thank all of you attendees who are here, because it shows that you are part of the change and part of growing and learning. And that's the most important thing at this point, is to continue to do the work. And so I'm just really thankful that all of you guys are here and wanting to do the work and listen to this conversation.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ashwini Prasad. You can see behind me, I'm also known as the inclusive screenwriter. And so my goals are to bring equity and justice through my scripts. And also, one of my main motivators is to bring back people that are erased or marginalized from history. And also, as an anti-racist educator, it's really important for me to create safe spaces. So we haven't had safe spaces, unfortunately, in Hollywood and also in Bollywood and other areas of entertainment, arts, and media. And that's one of my missions. So thank you so much for being here, and for ISA and Diane, it's been wonderful getting to know you as we've been going through all this fun stuff.
I'm Diane J Wright. I am a diversity story consultant. And what that means is I collaborate with producers, screenwriters, fiction writers and memoirists, and development officers, basically anybody who's involved with creating stories and putting it out into the world, to ensure that not only are those stories emotionally resonant, not relevant, resonant, but that they elevate the writer's voice. I mean, that's the basics of story consulting. But also, I work, because of who I am, to boost diversity, inclusion, and authentic representation. So I'm keeping an eye out for all the voices that may be in your world as a writer or producer that did not make it into your narrative. That's it.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you both for being here. Today, what we're going to do is I'm going to bring up the topic that we have sort of previously put down into how we're going to run this thing. And then I'm going to hand it over to you both to talk, so that I can also listen and learn. And then while we're doing this, guys, if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A box. And we may cut to those in between topics, or we may wait till the end, depending on how many we have and that kind of stuff. So the first thing, obviously, that we're going to talk about is there's a change presently happening in Hollywood that is on the forefront, which is, you know, demand and need and want for more diversity and inclusion in every aspect of film, television, what we're seeing out there. Can you guys talk about what this looks like for filmmakers and screenwriters?
Yes. Yes, we can. Well, it's a question of what is diversity, right? And because of the dominating conversations of the day, we tend to think of it in race only, but diversity includes every group of people that there is. So no matter who you are, no matter what group you belong to, there are others that do not have the access that you have, do not have some of the strengths that you have, that you can bring to the page to include them, to show that that is part of your world. And representation, as we know, matters. If you cannot see yourself, you don't know what's possible.
Yeah, no, it's really important. And I mean, you know, for those of us, I'm sure you've heard about what the Academy is doing. And so they put out 2 days ago in regards to new standards for what Best Picture must adhere to. And it's already popular on Twitter. I highly recommend all of you to actually read the articles before posting anything about it. And the reason why I'm saying that is that there's backlash. And it's uninformed backlash, because it's not saying that that you can't make any white leads anymore. And I had read a headline that said, "Are there going to be any more white people in movies anymore?" That's not what it is at all. It is about bringing in opportunities throughout the entire development and production cycle, from people that are in front of the camera and also behind the camera doing the work. And if you read the guidelines, you know, it's like 4 standards, 2 of them must be met for 1 category for the entire Academy Awards. And again, it's not just who's in front of the camera, it's also diversity, not skin deep. It's about LGBT are mentioned in there. There's a whole slew of different groups that are meant to be included. And it's just what Diane was saying. It's about including people that have been previously excluded. And, you know, like somebody like me trying to come in, if somebody's not going to give me a chance and allow me to shine, then you're not going to see me. And that's what it's meant to show. And that's what this work is meant to do. It's not meant to be exclusionary of, okay, well, we allowed all these groups to do this. Now we're going to just bring in and favor certain groups. No, it's about opening the door and allowing people to show their skills and that they have the skill set, they have the talents, and then bringing them in and giving them the opportunities that they've been denied for a very long time.
And it's about money. Let's not forget. People are getting tired of seeing the same faces and the same stories over and over and over again. And audiences, as you can see easily on social media, are demanding variety just because they're bored. So there are so many more stories that can be told. And the people who need to tell those stories are the people whose stories they are.
Yeah, 100%. And, you know, with Black Panther, 1.3 billion. I mean, gosh, you know, thank goodness for Chadwick Boseman and the legacy he's left. That's exactly right. And it's a mix of like, we're willing to pay as audience members. And so that's going to be able to bring in revenue. And so, I mean, this has been happening for some time, is folks have said, well, these stories that are, that have certain characters or certain people won't have a draw. Or something like men don't want to watch movies or films or entertainment with women in them. And it's not the case.
You're all here because you know that. So you want some practical stuff. So yeah, let's get to the stats, the nitty gritty. But thank you.
Sure. So I'll just start it off. One thing that is really important, if you don't already know, in 2015, there was a study done by UCLA, and they actually came out with it in 2020. And about 14%, and it hasn't changed much, 14% of screenwriters, so the folks that are probably on this call, are non-whites or would be considered BIPoC or BIPoC. However, 90% of film executives are white. So there's a huge disparity between the folks that are writing the scripts and those that are able to greenlight and give the money and say, yes, we want this content available on this network or this streaming service.
And that goes for representation as well. There was something recently about the agencies and who is working to bring those writers in are also majority not people of color. Yeah.
I believe it. And this is where Shayna was saying, you know, this move, and again, it's not about bringing in talent just because of a face or because of a description or an identification. It's just allowing talent to be able to come in and fix these disparities that have existed, and they have been systemic. And either unconscious bias, or I don't know what's come in. And if you don't know unconscious bias, it's the things that are in our heads that are ingrained, and they manifest in ways in our real lives. So if I see a certain script as a screenwriter and I'm reading it, and if I can identify with it when I'm reading it, what am I projecting that would make it much more of a bias towards maybe what I prefer versus what other people prefer. So it's important. Yeah, it's really important to address those things, understand the statistics behind it, and then realize that all these engagements that are happening are because of those stats and opening the doors that have been previously been shut.
Yeah, I think I just want to make it very clear that I mentioned it before, but we are talking about all the isms. So we're talking about including, we'll start broad and go narrow, women, half the population. We're talking about ageism, so including people who aren't just a young demographic. We're talking about people of different cultures, different religions, different ethnic backgrounds, ableism, people of different abilities, and I think I think I've covered the isms. I may have missed one or two. But basically, it's like giving yourself the room to think about who you may have been overlooking. And it's not malicious and it's not intentional that these omissions are happening. But to reverse that and to do better, we have to be a little more active. We have to take the initiative to make sure we are considering what we may or may not be putting on the page and doing that thoughtfully.
Yeah, and I love that point. And Diane, you and I have talked about that, but I would love to dive in, and I think the folks would benefit from this. How does that look like? So if, you know, if I'm a screenwriter, or I have my scripts, or I have my scripts that are in the drawers and I'm here because I'm ready to brush that dust off. You know, what is that, you know, like, let's talk through and give some folks some pointers on what is that going to look like?
So what Ashwini and I have done for everyone who's at this panel today, or everyone who's watching, we put together a takeaway list that we'll be giving you after, and we're going to go through this point by point. There is no 10 steps to being inclusive. It's not just that simple. You can't just pull out your scripts and go, okay, have I done these 10 things? But what you can do is use what we're going to give you today to spur your thinking every time you're sitting down to write, every time you're prepping something to give out, to distribute your work. And so first point, is this your story to tell? There's a lot of talk online and, you know, about who can tell stories, who can play stories as actors. Do we have to be those people to tell those stories? Well, no, we don't. But when we are not telling our own story of our own experience and our own culture, we need to consult people to check our authenticity. Like, are we saying this right? Are we representing you correctly? If we can't do that sufficiently, then it's time to bring someone on. If your story is about someone not of your culture, consider partnering with a writer or a consultant or somebody to look over your shoulder to make sure that your intent and your reasoning for putting this character in your story is meeting their experience and their understanding of their culture or life experience.
Right. It's breaking some of those stereotypes that we, outside of what we want to write may hold on to, and just check yourself and do it authentically.
Well, be honest. Like, that's the the first point is the hardest one. Is this something you have a right to be telling? You might not be.
Yeah, and that goes right into number 2 is why have you chosen to create this world and these characters? You know, what's drawing you in? And I think this is the last piece, and Diane, you're really key on this, and I love it, is you need to be clear-eyed about your motives and your script and why you're using these different characters, these situations in your work. And what's important here is that when you're really clear, and I want to make sure that folks understand, you may be living with your script before it goes into development and production and goes onto the screen for 5 to 10 years. Like, no joke. So are you willing to sit with this script at this time? I get it, things will change, but that's fine. But this is what we need to be projecting out here is, do I see myself really loving this script and these characters and this story, especially the story? Because it's of who you are, right? You're telling a little bit about yourself in your scripts. And so are you willing to sit with that? And this is where that second question comes in, which is pivoting right off that number 1 that Diane just mentioned is, why are you choosing this world? And really have that honest conversation about yourself and these different characters. I have that conversation with myself when I'm writing, and what right do I have? And I also mention it in my book, is that what right did I have to write a lesbian character as a heterosexual woman? And this is where these questions and how to came from. So I think that's super important.
And it's not black and white. It's not that because that's not your identity, you're not allowed. It's
Nope.
about being honest with yourself as you're doing the work so that you're avoiding people doing that for you when your work is out in the world so that you're clear about what it is you're saying and why you're writing it. Because, you know, we say, write what you know, and that is often taken a bit literally. What you know is your experience, your internal life, your understanding of the world. That's what you're bringing. And the character themselves don't have to be you, obviously. But when they are not, please do take the initiative to find someone to help you out with that.
Right. You actually have to be true to your character, to the character you've created. They have a truth that you need to research and find.
Next thing we want to talk about is, are all your characters similar to yourself? This happens a lot, especially with writers who are emerging, because the tendency is, because write what you know, all the voices tend to be the same, all the experiences of each character is not fully fleshed out in their own world with their own motivations. And to help out with that, a little more research, a little broader background work will help you dig in and ask yourself why this cast of characters isn't more diverse. Why is everyone on your page a lot like you or a lot like your friends? And maybe your world is very homogenous, and that's fine, but dig in a little bit and find out why that is and use that in your story. These are strengths that once you look them square in the face, you will be able to use to your advantage and to your story's advantage.
100%. And so that leads into, okay, so like, how do you do that? Because what, you know, what I found, I don't know if other people have found this, I'd be interested in the chat, is you, like, for example, when I was researching for my book, I was finding all these studies, and like, it really, you know, people's like, their hearts and minds are into it and they're really trying to do good. But one of the recommendations for change to bring in more inclusion and diversity in Hollywood around 2016 was to remove confirmation bias and stereotypes from your script.
But how? Yeah. Yeah.
So well intentioned. But if I'm an anti-racist educator, you know, I've been doing this work for 20 years, and this space is evolving. So if I don't have that experience, or if I have only been writing scripts a certain way, or if I'm a new screenwriter, how do you do that? And so this is where number 4, and a reminder, you're going to get this in a PDF after our presentation. But if you are writing outside your identity, you know, you need another question to ask yourself is, well, what do you need to add to create more realism? How are you supplementing your knowledge of other folks? And this is where researching is really, really important, and understanding that you need to put in the work like you would doing maybe a documentary or as an investigative journalist. And I'll share a personal example. I was thinking through this is that as I was mentioning earlier, I graduated from high school and grew up in Vancouver, BC, also Calgary, Alberta. Vancouver is definitely much more diverse than where I live currently in Calgary, Alberta. And so I had a lot of friends who were Chinese, and 25 years ago, I would have been like, yeah, I know Chinese culture. I have friends. And today, that's absolutely not what I would say, because I'm not in that body. I don't have people looking at me and having their own mental story of what a Chinese person is, what, you know, how they live their lives, etc. And so even though I may know folks and have grown up with them, I've eaten at their homes, I've met their parents, called them auntie and uncles, all of that, I haven't had that lived experience. And so even if I am writing a Chinese character, I'm still going to go and talk to Chinese folks, friends or other people, to understand their experience and what they would want to see themselves or their culture represented. And I think that's really important for folks. You know, one of the bigger takeaways for me that I would say is doing that research. And, you know, when you have your characters, make sure that you're giving them a shot and making sure you're being authentic to them as well as to yourself.
And specifically, yes, absolutely. Specifically about research, look for sources from the people you're writing about. So if you're writing about a character that uses a wheelchair, please don't go to an association that is supporting those people, but are not employing the people, or the articles you're reading aren't written by someone from that perspective, because you're not getting the full story. You're just not. So it's fine to use peripheral sources, but try to find, like, go on YouTube, see what someone's saying just about some other random topic, but just to get the idea of how they're perceiving the world from that vantage point. Find someone to interview, if by phone, by Zoom, however you can do it, but always seek out original sources, because that person's viewpoint, that person's internal narrative, what they're perceiving and processing will not be the same as yours. You cannot assume it, and that's where the richness of your writing comes from, that authenticity.
100%. And I think, what we're saying is, when you're talking to people, and then just making sure, I see in the chat, and folks are asking about what's equitable. And one thing that we want to suggest is, when you're thinking about equity, so what's fair, what's just, is ensuring that your character is depicted fairly. And even your unlikable characters. And Diane, I would love to pivot to you, even though this is my talking point, but you do this work. And I've loved what you said about one-dimensional villains versus really human villains. So, go, if you would, I would love for you to talk.
This is where my story starts to get repetitive, because I'm going to keep saying, dig into who your characters are. So we're going to come up on being asked to write a stereotypical villain. Right now, the Russians are the bad guys. Before, it was the Muslims are the bad guys. Like, there's always some group that's used in popular entertainment, because that's what's happening in our cultural awareness, as the villain, right? And if we're hired by a studio to do a project, it's going to be a little difficult to say, no, I don't want to do that. And you do have the choice to do that. But what you can do better than that is to dig into who that person is and their motivations, and build a full world around them, so that you're pivoting from the person, the Muslim is bad, to that person who happens to be Muslim is not the greatest person. You're looking at their character traits. You're looking at who they are inside, what drives them, what's their motivations, and you're depicting that so people can understand them as a person first, and then the stereotype that may be coming into play, unfortunately, but maybe, will be diffused, so that we can look at. I'll stop there. I think that's good.
Well, and this goes into bullet point number 7, is that multidimensionality. Because frankly, for me personally, I'm tired of seeing like a certain face, and all they do is they have a machete in their hand or a gun, and they just have a menacing face, and they're just running towards, just obviously kill is only in their mind. That's really actually super damaging. Especially when it's the same face, right? And you can come up with your own faces. I have one, I'm projecting them in my head of who this person is. And one example that I want to give before we move on to number 8 is my friend who is trans, queer, she told me to watch Disclosure on Netflix, and it is a documentary about trans folks. And in that documentary, there was a really, like, you always kind of have your one big takeaway when you're in when you're watching something. And my big takeaway while watching Disclosure was, one of the women that was interviewed was like, typically what you see trans folks depicted at in the media is that they either hate themselves or they are laughable characters, or both. And this is where it really hit me. And this can be applied to trans folks and
anybody. Yeah, anybody.
Yeah, is that when you're only seeing these repeated stories, repeated characters, one-dimensional look of a person and who they represent, you know, it's really harmful and it's super hurtful. And that's coming from the people that are being characterized. And this is where it got really powerful for me. And I can see that in my own experiences as a South Asian Indian, and the folks that I've seen that are very stereotypical, is that the woman said, if we had like successful trans folks that were lawyers and doctors and psychologists or stay-at-home moms, and then you had the ones that didn't loathe themselves or were funny, if there was a mix of these different groups that we were seeing and a mix of that humanity, then we can have these characters. When it's the only thing that we're like 90% of what we're seeing, that's when it gets super harmful. And that's when that exclusion and that really that media bias is coming in. And that's what we're, you know, that we want to focus on with the research tips that we're telling you, is how not to be perpetuating that. And, you know, that really hit home because this is a person from that group saying how it impacts them. And I think that folks on this call, myself, and maybe you, Diane, too, right? Like, these are the things that we have experiences about, and we're like, gosh, that was horrible. Like Apu on The Simpsons, like, oh my God, gosh, like how long has that been?
Definitely. To add to that, when I get calls for producers looking for scripts, like, do I know anybody who has this story, or do I know anybody who has a series that blank, blank, blank? What they're asking for is a point of view that is not falling into those stereotypes. So can we see a family drama that is maybe a Vietnamese family? Like, can we just see a regular love story that's a Black love story? It doesn't have to be about the issues that culture is talked about for. It doesn't have to be from that external gaze. What they're looking for is the internal experience of that life. Because traditionally it's been the majority group observing everyone else, and those are the stories we see from that point of view. It's flipped now, and audiences are demanding it, and producers and studios are demanding it. And when they say they don't have those writers and those stories, yes, they're not looking hard enough. That is true. But also the stories are still not, I'm not seeing a lot of them myself coming across my desk. So I'm wondering, maybe they aren't being put forth. Maybe we're not seeing complete stories, not just one person added here and one person added there.
Yeah, exactly. And what's powerful, what you're saying is, for me as a screenwriter, if you want to tell your trauma story, and it's, you know, and you have permission to also tell other people's trauma, okay, and, you know, we want to raise awareness about a social issue, absolutely write about it. You know, Diane and I are not saying don't write about it. But if you also just want to write characters that that could be a Black person portraying this human experience, or a South Asian, or somebody who's Vietnamese, then write those characters, you know, and create a human story. And so I think this is, I'm putting this into a dichotomy. I also talk with my hands, if you haven't noted. But you can have a dichotomy. And I'm speaking in the dichotomy right now, but of course, within a dichotomy, there's a lot in between. But if you want to write and have a social story you want to tell, awesome. And Hollywood's also looking for that. If you also want a human story, write that can incorporate different people. And one example, quick example I have is, you know, us. People have kind of pushed back on this, but I'll say this is my personal opinion. I'm only speaking for myself, is that you could have people that were purple in color in us, and that story still could have been told. And it was awesome that I got to see a Black family, you know, but it was a cool horror story. And it was nice to see a Black family, and it was telling a horror story from a human perspective, in my opinion. And it had Black actors, and it was awesome.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I already lost my train of thought. You reminded me of some. Oh, yes. One of the most powerful things when it comes to selling your story and pitching your story is the world, right? Everyone's always looking for that unique view into a world that is just interesting and something that hasn't been seen before. So that is a huge playing field right now, because you can just scroll through Netflix and you can just pick out your handful of categories that, you know, we've seen them over and over. So you want to take a look at that and then make one of them into a world that you know well, or a world you want to dig into that you hadn't seen before. It's taking the familiar and making it unfamiliar at the same time, not going way off left field, but bringing those points of view to light that we're just not getting to see nearly enough of.
Yeah, and I've noticed in the chat that somebody mentioned Peter Dinkle and Gott. And so we're not saying that there hasn't been representation, but, you know, he's like, for me, I'm like, gosh, there's only a few other little people that I know of that have been represented. And so I want to see more because these are the folks that are out there, not just, you know, skinny folks and heterosexual people and all the kind of one little dimension that we've been seeing.
Putting the weight all on screenwriters' shoulders, because clearly that's not where the bottleneck is, right? I mean, there are all these different parts of things, like the distributors, the people who are giving money to fund independent films. They have demands based on their historical market, what they've been able to sell before, what has done well before. So it's a battle for sure. But it does start with us. It does start with what we're putting out to choose from. And when you're pitching your stories, look for those very few and far between, but those stories that feature minorities or non-majority anyway. Like, what is the Crazy Rich Asians? I mean, not the greatest thing in the world, but it is representative of the fact that here's a community we never get to see doing regular things, and it did really well. So look for those stories to tag on to your description of what your film is, so that you can make your point in that way as well.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. It is just being able to tell those stories and being out there. And, you know, I think one thing that moving back into our guide here, Diane, is talking about our minor and background characters and how they're written. You know, so personally, when I write, I actually put in what, like an age-ish for folks, and then I put in their ethnicity, and I do it on purpose. I definitely put in their ethnicity on purpose because I want to, that's who I'm envisioning that character to be and to look like. And I don't want it to, of course I don't want it to change. But my goal, right, and like you're saying, and I hope that people realize this, but I'll repeat it if you don't know, is this industry, the screenwriters, we definitely can influence, but are we at the bottom or the start, wherever way you want to pivot that, of production and what content we see? Yes, that's exactly where we are. So we can influence. And what needs to happen is, as we're writing and folks are seeing more and more of these different folks, you know, people with disabilities, people who are neurodiverse, all of that being represented, then it's like, okay, development folks, click, yes. Hey, production folks, okay. And to be fair, things are definitely changing. I was talking to somebody who owns a production company in LA, and he was noting to me that even right now, a project is not being greenlit because they want changes in the demographics of that third-party production company, and they want to have a more diverse group than they currently have. So, you know, things are changing, and I think with us being able to influence and how we write different folks, so not just our main characters, but those minor characters too.
Let me toss a little bit in there, if I may. There are a couple ways you can go about this, and the nuance of what you choose is up to you and how you want your story to flow. So there's the use specificity in your writing. There's that argument, and to name and define every single character. But at some point that also gets, it bogs down the flow of the reading. So there's also the standpoint of make them as generic as possible, so that anyone can be cast in there. So you're walking between these two tightropes, these two opposite poles while you're creating these things, and your whole view is to keep that overall narrative flowing. So an example of that would be you're writing a taxi driver. You could, as a background character, not as a main character, just your main character is getting a cab, they have some story point discussed, and they hop off. So a few lines, no big deal. You can either specify who that cab driver is and give them a full background and make that a moment, or you can leave it completely generic without any gender so that casting can fill in with whoever. So it's up to you to strike a balance between a lot of information to force the hand and no information at all. And by but you can switch between them because there's a lot of background characters, right? Like
Yep.
The point is, you can, when you choose the former, when you choose to be specific about who that person is, make sure that that is helping your story along. It's not just a side piece that you're throwing in because, hey, diversity. That interaction needs to be incorporated and push your narrative along.
Meaningful characters, yes. Don't throw in diversity just to throw in diversity.
It happens a lot. I see a lot of just gender changes. Like I'll see a script that just has swapped the name of the character out and just hasn't incorporated who that person is at all. Like it's no longer a man, it's a woman. Okay, that's a different life experience. How is she going to attack this problem? How is she going to, what kind of external influences have changed? That kind of stuff. Same goes for everything.
Yeah, that's awesome. I really appreciate you saying that. Yeah, just don't have diversity for diversity's sake. Use it to really promote your story, right? And again, make sure that you're represented and you're telling your story, and bring in other people and tell their stories and represent them. So yeah, thank you for that point. I probably have done that where I'm like, oh, and I'll just change this, but change it to a woman just because. And it's like, no, we have to think like exactly what Diane was saying. How would somebody then, in the narrative of everything that person's doing, how they react to conflict, how they're solving for it, how does that change given the change you've made to that character? That's so important to consider.
Well, my entire job is to ensure that that hero's story is at the forefront and that everything else supports that. And in supporting that, it's a full and rich world. So especially if you want your voice and your point of view to be at the forefront of your script or your memoir or whatever piece that you're writing, you want to make sure that all the parts come together as they should, and the structure is right and the characterization is right, and all those basics that we're kind of skipping over because we're focusing on diversity inclusion. But it's not an extra. It's a part of making that experience more authentic and more resonant. I mean, people will attach to it. And if you can get people to feel, you are golden. That is your job as a storyteller, is to make people feel something. Never lose sight of that. With all of this stuff we're talking about, it comes down to that.
Right.
Yeah, tell that human experience. Bring that humanity back in. And, and it's like, again, I want to reinforce, it's not skin deep. You can have an all-white cast, but think about neurodiversity. Think about people with disabilities. Think about your LGBT character. Like that's who I want to see.
People of different ages.
100%. Gosh, yes. Give me some people with wrinkles. Like that's what I want to see.
I'm going to stress this again. If you are someone who's not part of the majority and you're writing, it doesn't mean that you automatically have a pass. If you are a writer who is hearing impaired and you're writing characters who, that's a bad example because I can't think of it off the cuff, but my point is you have a point of view that is not the same as other people in your world, in your narrative world. So no matter who you are, if you're 22 and you're hearing impaired, then maybe you've forgotten somebody who's 62 and not, or somebody who's visually impaired and you don't know what that experience is. So just Remember that even if we look around our actual lives and don't see a lot of diversity, because that can happen, it's up to us and it's our jobs to take a hard look at that and think about what we're putting out in the world, which is kind of our last point, really. What is the message that you're giving through your narrative? And I don't mean the theme, and I don't mean the actual like overall narrative message, but I mean, what are you trying to put in the world with your name attached to it?
What's the takeaway?
What's the
leaving
takeaway? Who
people?
are you, and what are you putting on the table for everyone to pick up and put into their lives, right? You're feeding people these words, and what is it you're nourishing them with? Even if it's a terrible story of horror and drama, and you know, I work in a lot of thrillers and genres, so it's not pretty, right? It's not like a positive, nice, yay, everything's great story, but it still has a point of view, and it still has a responsibility to accurately depict the people, good or bad in the story, good or evil, accurately depict them as whole people with motivations and histories.
I love that. Yes, that's it. Like, that's like mic drop.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So definitely, you know, again, this is actually going to be sent out what Diane and I went through the last, 35 minutes. And then also we're going to be sending out somebody asked in the chat, I want to address it, is a resource guide on how to write inclusively. It's a non-exhaustive list, but it's a starting point. Again, these are all starting points. We're not going to solve racism with PDFs. We're not going to solve exclusivity in Hollywood with 2 PDFs. But you know, again, as influencers, and I wish. I mean, here's your PDF. You're done. But you know, what we want to do, and the intention of this, is to provide you things to think about as you're writing and as you're bringing your stories into this world for us to, you know, eventually be seeing and consuming and reading, is some thoughts about how we can be more inclusive as this world changes and continues to want this inclusion. And I think one thing that's also really important for me, and this is a personal example, is up until Never Have I Ever, which came out recently on Netflix, I did not really see myself on screen. There was no character that I could.
Me either.
And so, you know, and this is like, we're kind of moving, as you can see, the shift in energy, like Diane and I are moving into real talk now. And so it's like, you know, I write this because it was so important for me, this belonging piece. I write this in my book, is that I imagine myself being 16 back in high school, if it had come out when I was in high school, and how impressionable I was at that time, of course, but how it could have really changed my perspective on media, and, you know, being able to like have those nights where we would go and watch it or binge watch it at somebody's house, and how we would use these different people and we would reference it to people in our real life. Like, so it was just such a powerful story to see, and how the culture that I grew up with was weaved into this narrative, but other people could identify with it, and how brilliant it was. And even like in my scripts, I poke fun of how we take shoes off and how neurotic sometimes parents can be about having your shoes off in the home. And it was played out in Never Have I Ever, but it was like, oh my gosh, like, yeah, I've been yelled at, you know, to take off your shoes.
And that came to the screen because of the filmmaker, because of who was behind that, but behind the scenes. So
Yeah.
it's very important that, again, the stories start with us and we put it forth. And what I meant by that earlier was I still haven't seen myself on the screen. I'm still waiting. You know, and being someone, so I am Black, I'm biracial, I'm a woman, I'm over 40, I'm neurodiverse, invisibly disabled. Where am I? I'm still not there. And the world is creeping slowly forward, and there's a little bit, there's maybe one story here, one story there, but they're still not me. So there's lots and lots of room for all of you who are out there living your individual lives, whatever they may be. There's room for you. And if you're somebody who is the majority, who's seen lots and lots of yourself in all the media over time, and you have these stories in your drawer, or maybe you're a very established writer and you're facing this world now that you're maybe being overlooked because no one wants to hear that right now. There's lots of opportunities still to dig into your stories that you've already written, look into your life, ask those tough questions, and wonder, like, okay, well, if this is my perspective, how does it affect somebody from another group? Can I change some of my characters to a different perspective and change the interaction and the dynamic of the story I've already written? Diversity within inclusion is important too. Just hard left segue. Diversity in inclusion means characters aren't just one thing. So you can have a single mother who is working in a nail salon, say. She's not just a single mother. She may be of a particular, from a particular region of the world. She may also be somebody who uses a cane to walk. She may also be pansexual. You know, people can be a lot of things. There's a lot of room within your scripts to dig into every single person you have, even if they are a middle-aged white male character played by Ryan Gosling.
There's so much out there, and it's you know, it's all these different people, and how important it is to see, because like one thing that I've seen in like the South Asian Indian groups that I'm in is, because we don't see ourselves on the screen or know of people, the path in entertainment isn't, at least in North America, I'll speak to North America, isn't there. Now, I don't know how it is in India with Bollywood, because that's a huge other, you know, it's like almost like another country with the amount of GDP that it brings, money it brings in. But you know, how powerful it is, and the different avenues that it would create when you're able to see folks and have folks that that just encompass the world that we live in. I think one thing to understand is, going back to stats, is that Asia, in China and India are the two leading billion people, countries. And the United States is third with only about 330 million people. Now, it's a difference of that influence, but as more and more people come in, as we have access to the internet in many what we called developing countries, as these countries are coming up and they're having access to content, they're looking for, you know, stories that they can relate to as well. And and I really am loving the Netflix content that I'm seeing coming out of Spain, coming out of Germany, and it's opening me up to all these different stories. And you know, sometimes and even I'm like, oh gosh, I wish I spoke German so I could really understand and not worry about the dub. But I'm really enjoying the content, and I'm enjoying to see these different industries coming out with great content that I'm really enjoying, that's not just US based. And I think, you know, just focusing that, like what we're saying is that you are abundant, and there's an abundance of stories out there, and you know, and you can really bring in so much. And you know, I would encourage you to take a look at ways that you can bring in different people and different voices.
I am looking through
really quickly. I do want to see you on the screen. I want to see somebody. You're lovely, so why not bring that loveliness to the screen?
I just want to see people who experience life like I do, and I want to see those stories.
Do you guys want to jump to some questions?
Can I? I'm looking through the Q&A. Is that how we can do this?
Yep.
Yes.
If you want to look through them, you can pick one out, or I can pick one and read one to you guys. What do you want to do?
That would be easier for me.
Okay, perfect. Well, there were quite a few questions while you guys were talking about either not putting down a description of a character versus being very heavy-handed in your description of your characters, whether they're lead characters or supporting characters. Yeah. Can you guys just talk a little bit This is from Anonymous, but what are the best ways to put that description in? Are you talking about just their race, or, you know, is there too much of a description, or is it really just based on what you personally as a writer would like to include?
If I may, this is, you're not going to like this answer, because this is where it comes down to there is no black and white rule. There is no, this is how you do it. How you have to approach this is from your overall story. So if you're trying to depict a world and somebody, a world that's unusual, I can't come up with examples really quickly, but your main character, their entire being should relate to the world that you're depicting, or the plot of the story, or so you're going to spend a little more time being clear about who that main character is in the introduction. If it's necessary that they are a Black woman for whatever reason, then you need to say it so that the person reading the story is following your lead, right? But if it's a very minor character, then you're not going to spend that much time taking it. You only have so many words in a screenplay, right? You're not going to spend that much time with the nitty gritty of who that person is. So you have to use your best judgment. But you also, the judgment has to be based on how relevant that is to the character. Again, you're eliciting emotion and you're bringing us into someone's world. So what they're wearing isn't as important as what it means about who they are. So your introductions and your time spent on the ethnicity of the character, or whatever visual you're building, because we're talking about a visual medium, needs to relate to the problem that person is having in that story, what they're trying to, what they want throughout, just the world that they're in. You're building that image in your reader's mind. So be concise and judicious, but also be specific enough that you're conveying the information you need to move the story forward. Is that too vague?
No, I think for me as a writer, listening to you answer that, I think it's the description is not as important as the character itself and what they're doing within the script of what's happening in the story.
It's a much bigger game.
Yes.
And that introduction is just the taste to build the image in your reader's mind so you can move forward. That character better be throughout the entire script. Everything that you're trying to jam into that introduction had better come out throughout the entire script, because that's the job.
Right.
Yeah, and I would say I'm more heavy-handed, and I hear what folks are saying. I choose to put in at least the ethnicity because I'm writing specifically, like I said, I bring back people that have been erased or marginalized from history. So traditionally what I'll do is I actually put in an age range, and then I'll put the ethnicity and leave it at that. And I do agree that then the rest of the story flows to build that character given the choices that I make as a screenwriter. So I know.
Can I build on that for a second, if you don't mind?
Just really quick.
Finish, yeah.
It depends is always that answer that people are like, but you know, I think again, just what are you trying to represent and what do you want to make sure gets put on, well, make sure as much as you can control as a screenwriter gets put on screen.
Yeah, I wanted to support what you're saying, that if you have that level of specificity that you want in the end product of your film, then the way to do that is to build the entire film around that person's identity, right? Because if it's an action thriller, say, that's fairly generic, and you're putting in somebody who's not fairly generic, that if they can be easily swapped out, you're kind of not doing it right. Is what I'm saying, right? If they can just be like tossed out for another actor without a full rewrite, because a lot of the work I do comes down to something's being cast and it needs to be rewritten to go out to a name actor so that it fits their sensibilities and they want to come on the project. So it has to be deep enough throughout the film to be authentic. is what is what I'm saying. By putting in too much up front, you are being a little bit off-putting because you're shutting down casting. And as we know right now, to get your movie made, there's a very tiny list of people who will get the funding coming in, and they're not super diverse. So again, it's a balancing act.
It is, yeah, and it's
I'm
hard.
not disagreeing with you at all.
Oh, no.
Okay.
I think, you know, what's important too as screenwriters and folks that are in development or production, whoever is here today, is, you know, the more scripts you read, the more ideas you'll get. So I do encourage you, I've heard too much that, oh, it's, you know, writers are a lonely experience. No, find your people. You know, I'm on Instagram, Diane, you're on Instagram. There are people who are willing to trade, read the first 10 pages, and from there you can see what people are doing. And I think, you know, and even though there's not a standard versus kind of the typical, you know, capitalize the person when we first see them on screen and give them a brief description so we kind of get a context who they are, we can start seeing that and incorporate that into our work.
Please find me on Twitter. I am so not all over Instagram.
You're a Twitter person, that's right.
Yeah. Well, the writing community is just like so vibrant on Twitter. So
yeah, definitely. And we'll
Okay.
give those handles out soon.
Yes, at the end we'll do those and we'll put them up in the chat also. I have two great questions and I appreciate the honesty coming from both of these people. First, I'll start with Ed. He's asking, I know, when working on a story with the kind of diverse characters that you're not familiar with, at what point do you sit down and actually get writing? I can see someone getting bogged down in research and never getting to writing the first draft. Should you just pull the trigger on the first draft and then look to fix the problems later, or set yourself a deadline for completing the research, or just research until you feel good about it?
Go ahead.
One thing I encourage people is that, again, we're not providing edicts, right? And so you need to do what works best for you. What's important is that you're doing the research. And so in my book, I talk about how to do that. And I give you examples of different ways you can interact with people, either face-to-face, Zoom to Zoom, or if you don't know, if you can't find a group of a certain ethnicity, where to look for information and questions to ask yourself. So again, that's a starting point. And I think what's important, again, is that what we talked about earlier in the guide that you're going to get, are you really telling this human story, and have you done justice to your characters? And if you can answer that for yourself, then that's great. And then what you can do, and I've done this when I send out scripts and I send out like my book, you know, you can ask that question as a feedback point. When you get feedback from other writers about your script, is, you know, does this person feel real to you? Do you feel like, you know, that they are represented, or, you know, does this remind you of so-and-so? And one other thing you can do is, like, if you're going to talk about a group that you don't know about and you've done your research to where you feel good and you've written it, make sure you send that script to another person that belongs in that group to get a different perspective. And then you can ask those questions. Do you feel like this is what you would want to see? You know, and again, this is just one person's perspective, but it's better than nothing. We can ask that question. So does that, you know, does this feel representative? Am I doing justice to this character? Am I doing justice to this human story?
Yes, I see. Sensitivity readers. Yes. There's an entire group of people who will do this for you. You can find them. There are groups on Facebook. Yeah, I'm one at times. You can find them out there just on social media, but their job is to read your work from the perspective of the character that you're writing about, and to help you get to the place you want to get to in terms of authenticity. It's well worth it, and it's usually not that expensive.
So there's a few questions on here. I'm going to kind of put them all into one. So after you've written the script and you feel like it's in a good place, there's lots of people wondering how you get your script, because the decision makers maybe aren't there yet, and a lot of them are white males. How do you get to the next level? How do you get your work out there if you have something that you feel like is ready to go?
Well, there's two parts to that. One, they are looking for you. because their jobs are depending on making the industry have more of this content. They have been given mandates, so they're looking for you. That's the good news. The not great news is that it's still about the work and the connections. So whether you are diverse writing inclusively or not, I think the mechanism still works the same, but I am not the person to tell you that, because I am not doing that well with that myself. My work is still with other people's scripts. I still work as a ghostwriter behind somebody, people of the majority, because I am still not seen as a woman who's over 40, who's like all the things that I am. I'm not going to give you advice on how to get representation, because it's not easy.
Yeah, my answer to the question is network, network, network.
Yep.
So Diane and I are both part of Women of Color Unite, for example. So that's been established for a couple of years, specifically for women identifying folks that are people of color. There are tons of Facebook groups. There are, like Diane was mentioning, a writing community on Twitter. There's huge communities out there, and people are looking for you. I think also, you know, if you want, you have those scripts and you want to get them out there, you know, just look for you can Google this, literary managers. Look for your managers that can help you get your work in front of producers. And social media is a wonderful place of just following people and being engaged and building those relationships with folks.
Yeah, I'm going to be brutally honest that Hollywood is not a meritocracy. It is definitely a social network, absolutely. And there are initiatives like Women of Color Unite that are trying to break through that, but it's not the norm, and it is going to be more difficult if you're somebody who's not living in the area, or if you don't have a lot of established connections in the area. You have to forge those. You have to make those. Yeah, I wish it was the best screenplay wins, but it's not.
No, it's not. It's 100% what Diane's saying. It's who you know and who's going to connect you. And the goal is to open the doors so that various folks can come in and connect, that before we're so isolated. And the goal is just to bring in, not skin deep, just so many different writers and different people, those white young males too, bring them in to have the conversation, and so that we all can start getting to know each other. It still is a hustle. It still is work. And it's a lot of work. But again, that's that earlier comment that I made like 50 minutes ago. You know, is this something that you are going to love in 5 to 10 years, for however long it's going to take to get on screen? And maybe you'll be that, you know, 0.05% that overnight. Awesome. That's going to be you. I'm so happy. For the rest of us, if it's going to take longer, what are you going to be proud of, and what's something that you want to hold on to, so that you're willing to do the work to get it on screen?
Yeah, and if you're someone like me who is not socially gifted, and it is more than difficult to meet the expectations and what's needed to just swim in this soup that is this socially driven atmosphere. It's incredibly difficult, and people do not understand, and it's extra work to make them understand, and that's part of it. And I'm sorry, but if that's you, it is going to be harder for you than everyone else, but it's not impossible. I have found my way. I have found a way to do what I love. It may not look like the traditional, got my screenplay out, got my movie made, got awards, yay, it's all great. It's definitely not that. But I still get to work with scripts that I love and work with writers that I love and get other people's voices out. And that fills me way more than, because I've made films, and you have to really look hard at what you want out of this career. You know?
Here's a fun question for you guys.
Now that I brought y'all down.
I know, I'm like, let's bring it back up. No, it's the truth though. And that's the hard conversations sometimes are the truth. And then you get to build up from there. That's the truth.
Right. It's not impossible. It's just, this is it can be difficult, but it's not out of reach at all.
I'm going to ask just a couple more questions, and then I'm going to let you guys tell people where to find you.
Okay.
And then we will wrap up. First question, do either of you remember the first movie or show that you saw yourself somewhat represented in, and what was it?
Ooh, I think we covered that. No.
Right, yes.
Yeah, just recently, I mean, outside of a stereotype, and this is one thing I want to just bring up with that question. I think it's great, but you got to remember, I have seen myself in Bollywood. So, I've seen people that look like me or kind of, whatever. But I would say in North American content, it really hasn't been till this spring, and never have I ever.
Yeah. And I will say I'm seeing myself in characters and in actors like Tracy Ellis Ross. I mean, that woman gives me life. And there are many other people, but as a whole, or more than one part of me at a time, no.
That makes me sad.
It makes me really sad. And that's, kind of why I have my little subversive, like, stick all these diverse characters into every script. I've been doing it for like 30 years, or not 30 years, I'm not that old, but been doing it forever. Because there just needs to be more of everybody out there.
Well, then what do you guys think about, or do you have advice on, or just, support for people who are creating their own tables instead of waiting to get a seat at the table?
Again, connecting with the different folks that are trying to do this work. Again, when you're coming into this, it's about that networking piece. So who are you networking with? And I'm going to talk to somebody, like I'm channeling a new connection I have over at Staff Me Up. That's a production company, employment agency, basically. I think I'm saying that right. Sorry if I'm not. But there's various initiatives already happening, led by all sorts of different folks that are trying to connect people that you typically wouldn't connect with. And that's what you need to do. And so my suggestion is, kind of like what we were discussing earlier in our takeaways, well, in terms of who's in your stories, but who are you connecting with in your life too? So are you connecting with only certain types of movie directors or new producers or new writers? What are you doing to venture out to connect with the Dianes of the world? And then who else she knows? And so you need to ask yourself that question and make your decision of who you are networking with.
Very true.
Yeah, I have nothing more to add to that.
Okay, so will you guys tell everyone who's listening where they can find you, how they can connect with you, any other information that you want to share before we wrap it up?
Yeah, sure. We're going to be sending you information, so you'll see that in the email. But I am Diane J Wright, WRIGHT.com, and on Twitter. And yeah, that has all the information. I put it all in one place.
Okay.
Right, one place. Let me move my head, but what's behind me is the Inclusive Screenwriter. So you can find me on my website, and that has all my contact info and a little bit about me and the services I offer. Also, if you're on Instagram, that's my handle, The Inclusive Screenwriter. So I can't wait to connect. This would be a lot of fun. Diane and I are already connecting, so it's like,
yeah, it is nice, isn't it? I've spent a good part of this year since we've been locked down just really like reaching out and getting to be part of all these communities I didn't really get to participate in before, and it's been amazing. And everyone's like meeting virtually, so it's just so much easier, and people are from a broader geographical base, and it's amazing what people are making happen despite what's going on in the world.
Well, I love that, because of Zoom, it's like I don't need to be in LA like I was last year. where it's like, hey, you live in LA, cool. I live in Oregon, let's talk, you know, like I love that. So take advantage of this too, like what you're doing by being on this webinar and all the other free webinars that are out there. And, you know, like I'm seeing the chat come through, make your connections through people this way and all the things that are offered. It's so great. And, you know, my network's your network. So connecting with either one of us, you can scroll through who else we're connected to.
Yeah.
And
Definitely come find me, because I will hook you up online with anyone. I don't care. if you want community with people writing in the genre you're writing in or at the level you're writing at, I will do whatever I can to make it happen, because I mean, that's what we're here for, to hold each other up.
Absolutely.
we'll rise together. Yeah.
Well, thanks to both of you. Now I'm like familiar with,
And Diana.
because I didn't really speak that much during this. So now I'm like trying to catch up. My tongue's like, what? Thanks to you both for being part of this conversation and leading it, you know, and talking us through. Like they both mentioned, we are going to send out an email with the takeaway documents that were discussed. So look out for that, as well as it will include the link to rewatch this. So if you want to rewatch, and it will be on our tips and tricks page on Sunday. And also thank our ASL interpreter, Diana, for being here and working the whole time. Thank you so much. And Molly's back. So thanks everybody, and have a great weekend. Try to make the most out of today, and we will see you all soon. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much, everyone.